Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our series of webinars, Latin American Flavors, Exploring Cheese Traditions. Today, we have Dr. Rodrigo Ibanez. He holds a PhD in Food Science and Technology from University College Cork, National University of Ireland. He currently works as an associate scientist in the Cheese Research Group at the Center for Dairy Research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He studies multiple topics related to cheese, like cheese defects, impact of cheese components in human health. And additionally, Rodrigo supports teaching activities in CDR for short courses, especially those offered in Spanish. I'm very glad to have Rodrigo, and it's very exciting today to learn about cheeses from Chile because he happens to be from Chile. So join me to welcome Rodrigo. We will open the floor for you. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello everyone. Just give me a second. I'm trying to share my screen now. So if I can just, let's see how this goes. Okay. Can you see it or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so just give me a second.
We could see it now.
Okay, I need to switch this. Just give me one little second. Okay, so I think now you're seeing the whole presentation. Am I right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this presentation about cheeses from Chile. My name is Rodrigo Ibanez, and as Carmen introduced me, I'm a scientist at the Center for Dairy Research. I work specifically at the Cheese Research Group, but I'm really glad to talk to you today, to you all about cheeses from Chile. All right. So during this presentation, I would like to introduce you first about my country, which is Chile. All right. Just give you a small introduction about population, location, and so on. And then I will also like to address the Chilean, talk a little bit about the Chilean economy, talk about the dairy production systems occurring in Chile, and then after that, start talking about the cheeses from Chile. And when I be talking about the cheeses from Chile, I will be talking more about the typical cheeses that we have in our country. All right. So I will go through those ones made with cow milk and some of them with goat milk. All right. And after that, we will wrap up with some final remarks. All right. So let's start now. So just so you know, as I told you, I'm from Chile, and everyone who lives in Chile typically says that Chile is a very long and narrow country. This very long and narrow country is located in the southwest side of South America, all right? Chile shares borders with Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, all right? And the west side of Chile is we have no border, but instead we have the Pacific Ocean, right? So we have a very long coast in Chile, all right? More than 6,000 kilometers or 4,000 miles, right? Talking about Chile, our population is about 20 million people estimated for this year, and our capital city is located in Santiago, just right in the middle of this very long and narrow country, all right? Santiago is located in the middle of the mountains by the Andes. In this photo, you can clearly see that we have the city, and then we always see on the east side the Andes Mountains, which in these photos are with a lot of snow, but usually it's not like that. Santiago was founded in 1541 by Spaniard settlements, all right? But interestingly, Chile is a very centralized country, all right? So Chile, in Santiago, lives more than 30% of the total population, all right? Something very interesting about Chile is that we have a great diversity of climates going from north up to south, all right? So just for your general information, in the northern side of Chile is a very arid region. We have the Atacama Desert, which is typically one of the driest places on earth, all right? Central region of Chile, we have the Central Valley area where we have a climate that is pretty similar to what you can see in California, right? A sort of Mediterranean climate, semi-arid regions, and a lot of production of fruit, wine, and so on. And then going more into the south of Chile, we have rainy regions, and specifically that's where we have mostly of our dairy production in the country, all right? That we're gonna talk later on a little bit. But Chile is also known for having all these other awesome places. We have a place, the Chiloé archipelago is a very nice place to go for tourism. The Patagonia is also a known place in Chile. Chile also has territories in the Antarctic, and Chile is also well known for Easter Island, which, just for introduction, is our equivalent to Hawaii to the United States. All right. If I want to introduce you about the Chilean economy, it's really important to highlight it because Chile has a pretty strong economy in relative terms to what we know of Latin America. All right, and Chile has main economic activities. The main economic activities are like mining, agriculture and livestock, tourism, and so on. So in terms of mining, Chile is the largest producer of copper and the second largest producer of lithium in the world, right? In terms of agriculture, Chile produces a considerable amount and quantity of different fruits, all right? Anywhere from berries, cherries, grapes, all right? Chile is also well known for the production of wines, all right? But Chile can, in terms of livestock, can also have dairy cows, okay? But in generally speaking, the economy of our country is relatively stable, all right? But let's start talking now. Let's talk now about the dairy production in Chile, milk production in Chile, all right? The production of milk in Chile is relatively low, all right? Chile produces per year roughly 2.2 million tons of milk per year. If we compare it to the last 20 years, that's been an increase of 28% of an increase of milk production. But if we take a look at the data from the last 10 years, we have a relatively constant production of milk, all right? Again, we produce a relatively low amount of milk if we compare with other countries in South America. If we compare with Argentina, Chile produces roughly 6 times less milk than Argentina, 17 times less than Brazil. And if we start comparing with some US states, with the state of Wisconsin, Chile produces roughly 7 times less milk than Wisconsin, or 9 times less than the state of California. But again, it is important to highlight that Chile has its own dairy region, all right? As again, this is a map of Chile that shows different regions of the country, all right? Similarly to the United States, the regions in Chile are our own mini states, all right? So in the southern side of Chile, we have our state region, all right? And the state region produces roughly more than 80% of the total milk produced in the whole country. All right. It is important to highlight that when we see the statistics of milk production, more than 50% of that milk is used for cheese manufacture. All right. cheese manufacture has shown a strong increase in the last 20 years, all right? And I have to really highlight here that in terms of cheese manufacture in the country, Chile produces roughly from 9 to 15% of fresh cheeses, and the rest going from 91 till 90, from going roughly 88% of the cheeses that are produced are semi-hard cheeses, all right? But if we see historical data in the last 20 years, the production of cheeses in Chile have increased for roughly 80%, all right? And that has been mostly associated due to changes in the production of on the processing conditions of Chile, all right? 20 years ago, there was a lot of production of milk powders, but after the economical crisis of 2008, dairy manufacturers decided closing a lot of milk processing facilities for dairy powders. And instead, they decided to produce more cheese for export market instead, right? Besides, all of this data that I've been showing to you right now is associated only to the production of cow milk, right? In Chile, surprisingly, there's no official data on how much goat or sheep milk or cheeses are being produced. But if we start taking a look at data from United Nations, there are some estimations here that we can take a look, all right? The FAO has no statistical data regarding sheep milk, but they have shown some results about the cheese manufacturing, all right? The manufacture of cheese out of goat milk is very low when we compare it to cow milk, but it's still relevant for small manufacturers, for small dairy farmers that are located in the north of the country, the north of the countryside, all right? So in this map, I'm just trying to illustrate, this is the middle of the country, Santiago, and this is the region where goats are mostly produced. 80% of the total goats in the country are located. And this is the goat dairy area of Chile, all right? But again, in terms of numbers, we produce cow to goat milk on a ratio of 100:1. It means that per 1 kilogram of goat milk we make in the country, we are making 100 kilograms of goat milk, all right? So that's something to highlight. So based on these statistics about cheese production, I will address my presentation to introduce you different type of cheeses that we are producing in Chile. Chile produces either cheeses made out of cow milk, all right? Which we have our typical cheeses, chanco cheese, gouda cheese. Again, here there's no misspelling. This is how we spell our traditional gouda cheese, which is basically a Chilean version of the traditional Gouda cheese, all right? Chile also produces queso fresco or fresh cheeses. There is another variant of queso fresco named quesillo, all right? And in this presentation, I will also be addressing some of the cheeses made from goat milk, all right? Most of the important cheeses are Cordillera, all right? It doesn't have much prevalence in the market, but it's a very traditional way how this cheese is made, all right? And I will also be talking a little bit about fresh cheeses made out of goat milk, all right? So I'm gonna start talking about the most traditional cheese made in Chile, which is known as chanco cheese, all right? To put you into context, in the Americas, there were no ruminants for milk production prior to the arrival of European colonists, all right? So to put you into context, in the 1500s, Spaniards brought into South America ruminant animals for milk or meat, production, all right? But they mostly brought sheep and goats, all right? But besides bringing these animals, they brought the cheese making traditions in early 1500s. And just to keep you under the context, the capital of Chile was founded in 1541. So around that time, Spaniards came into where Chile is settled now, but they also brought animals, all right? So over time, and with the colonization of Spaniards into Chilean territories, they brought the traditions, they brought the animals, and then in the 1700s, local farmers in one region that is called Maule region in Chile, small farmers from this area in a small town named Chanco started making cheese. But it was a very particular cheese. It was a cheese made mostly out of sheep milk, all right? And this cheese was made with cooking steps, and then this cheese was ripening for long periods of time, up to 1 year. The type of cheese that was obtained was similar than a Gruyere style cheese, right? So the cheese that was made in Chile in a town named Chanco was made out of sheep milk, and it was ripening for long periods of time. With time and with trading, that area of Chile, in the small town of Chanco, became popular for the type of cheeses that were produced, all right? This cheese was not cheap, all right? So usually one of the richest families that were living and settled there in Chile started buying these cheeses, started trading in these cheeses, and they started transporting the cheeses into different regions of the country, going from Copiapó up north up to Valdivia down south, all right? But besides that, near Chanco, there is still a city named Constitución, and then in Constitución there was a port that started exporting cheeses into different places in Latin America, such as Peru. There are some historical data that shows that there was exporting of this Chanco cheese made out of sheep milk to California and even Europe. All right. So that's historically in the 1500s, 1800s, we produced this cheese that was even exported and consumed across South America. All right. However, in early 1900s, there was a big change. There were a lot of political and social changes over there. Manufacturers started losing interest on Chanco cheese tradition. Instead, they became more curious about European cheeses. And then they started, traders started importing European cheeses, all right? But manufacturers started making European cheeses back in Chile, all right? Therefore, the tradition of making Chanco cheese was lost, all right? In order to make these more traditional European cheeses, they brought cows into Chile, all right? And then we lost the tradition of producing cheeses exclusively out of sheep milk, all right? So then universities became curious about studying about cheese technology. And then in early 1930s, universities played an important role in studying the technological aspect and teaching people of how to make cheeses accordingly. And then they started establishing standards of identity. They started to establish manufacturing protocols to produce cheeses with the best quality. And it was in the 1930s when Chanco cheese was was being produced again, but in this case was not produced out of sheep milk anymore, but instead out of cow milk, all right? And then out of these studies, they brought ideas of how to improve the quality of the cheeses, all right? Later on, in the late 1940s, the concept of pasteurization of milk was introduced in the country, all right? Plus the use of commercial starter cultures and the use of commercial runnets to make cheeses and improve the quality. And therefore, in early 1950s, there was a considerable improvement in the quality, and it started the manufacturing of cheeses at large scales of production. There was an industrialization of the dairy industry back in Chile. This type of cheese, chanco cheese, has been traditionally made in a new way since almost 100 years ago, all right? This cheese is very traditional and it represents 25% of the total cheese market back in Chile, all right? But I want to highlight how this chanco cheese is made, all right? Chanco cheese can either made by either raw or pasteurized milk, all right? It's made with mesophilic starter cultures, all right? And when we talk about mesophilic starter cultures, we use citrate positive bacteria for citrate fermentation that will contribute to the formation of aromatic compounds for battery flavors, all right? And also some gas formation is ideally in this type of cheeses to produce it with a quite open texture, all right? During the manufacture, there is also a critical step that involves partial whey drainage as well as whey dilution step, all right? The partial whey drainage will remove roughly 30% of the total whey during manufacture, and then we replace that whey with the addition of water. And the incorporation of water can be completely different if we are making cheeses on an artisan way or in an industrial way. Industry typically add warm water back for whey dilution, all right? And after the addition of the warm water, the industry start a cooking step to increase the acidification rate as well as decrease the moisture content of the curd obtained. In contrast, small manufacturers they add hot water right away into the mix of curd and whey to rapidly increase and reach the cooking temperature and reach the desirable temperature of cooking until the acidification and loss of moisture occurs, all right? Typically, after the curd reaches the ideal pH, the curd is placed in hoops that could have different shapes as either blocks or small wheels that are later pressed and placed into brining solutions for salting, all right? And after salting, these cheeses are typically ripened for very short periods of time, anywhere from 7 to 45 days at temperatures that are ranging between 50 to 58 degrees C with 85% of relative humidity. That will help us out to produce a desirable rind in these cheeses to protect the interior core of these cheeses. During storage and ripening, we have to take care of the rind, and therefore the cheeses have to be churned every day just to form a proper and homogeneous rind. In the case if mold contamination occurs, these rinds are washed with a brine solution and scrubbed to remove the undesirable mold on the surface of these cheeses. In terms of composition of chanco cheese based on standards of identity, it can be different based on if these cheeses are either young or mature, or if they are either made at artisan level or industrial levels. But roughly, in terms of moisture content, Chanco cheeses tend to have from 44 to 50% moisture content, and a fat in dry matter that goes anywhere from 45 till 52%. But typically, the pH of these cheeses are roughly around 5.2 and 5.4. So what are the main sensory characteristics of Chanco cheeses? As I mentioned before, it depends on how these cheeses are made. That it depends of the manufacturer if they can either make these cheeses in either blocks or wheels of different sizes. When we're talking about blocks, we're talking about blocks as small as 4 pounds, going from 4 pounds to 20 pounds. Whereas when we're talking about wheels, we're talking about very small wheels, 1 pound up to 5 pounds. All right, and that's gonna depend specifically of the manufacturers. All right, and as I mentioned before, Chanco cheese tends to have a specific tends to develop a rind, but in some cases there are some manufacturers that they don't want to deal with that, and instead they add a wax or a coating material to protect the cheeses during storage, during ripening as well and as in storage. One of the main characteristics of the Chanco cheese is that it has this pale yellow appearance color, all right? And one of the main characteristics of the Chanco cheese is that it has the presence of mechanical openings, all right? So usually after hooping the curds and pressing, the pressing is very gentle, all right? Plus, during manufacture, the use of citrate positive static cultures can contribute to keep this structure open, all right? So in terms of body, Chanco cheese is a semi-hard, creamy, and pasty body, right? Based on the moisture content of Chanco cheese, we can play with the pastiness, all right? There is another variant of Chanco cheese that is called Mantecoso cheese. Mantecoso can be translated as fatty, all right? So consumers associate this pastiness of Chanco cheese with more fat content. So usually if you want to make this variant of Chanco cheese, Mantecoso cheese or fatty cheese, we have to increase the moisture content of the cheese, all right? And that's basically what we can say about the texture on the body of the products. And then these cheeses have a very short period of ripening, and therefore the typical flavor are associated with milky notes, but as well as battery notes. Again, because of the incorporation of started with citrate fermenters that will contribute to the formation of diacetyl, all right? So that's everything we can say about all the attributes on sensory analysis of Chanco cheeses. When we talk about defects, we have a lot of defects that we have to be aware of when we're making this type of cheeses. These cheeses, we have to be really careful of targeting the right moisture and salt content. Typically, cheese manufacturers tend to make cheeses with very high moisture content and therefore lower salt to moisture ratios. Increased moisture content and low salt to moisture ratios tend to have an effect on an increase on the residual rennet in the cheeses, but lower salt content can also activate and the enzyme activity of cheeses. Therefore, we may end up with cheeses with high proteolysis. High proteolysis leads to cheeses with increased bitterness and excessive bitterness, right? Some other cheese manufacturers have to deal with excessive acid development, right? Even though we perform partial whey removal and whey dilution to control acid development in cheeses, there are some cheese manufacturers that have decided not to do it because they don't want to deal with high volumes of whey for further disposal. In Chile, we're still, especially small manufacturers, are dealing with how to dispose whey. They don't have the capabilities of further processing it. So in some cases, they use it for animal feeding, and they don't want to overuse water. Chile has also a lot of water management issues. So some cheese manufacturers don't add water to control acid development. If that's the case, we're going to end up with cheeses with excessive acid development, and excessive acid development will contribute to accumulation of calcium lactate crystals after these cheeses are transformed into either blocks or either slices, or even we can see them in the right accumulation of calcium lactate crystals. All right, depending of the hygiene of the hygiene quality of the milk, the cleaning and sanitation protocols in the cheese plants, and the exposure to temperature abuse of these cheeses, we may also end up with undesirable gas formation. Again, Chanco cheese are typically ripened at high ripening temperatures. So that's something that we also have to bear in mind from that end. So that's basically everything that I have to mention about Chanco cheese. So now I would like to start introducing you the Gouda cheese. And again, there's no misspelling here. That's how we spell it in Spanish. And when we say Gouda, how we write Gouda, as in here, is basically the same way as it's said Gouda in Dutch for the traditional Dutch variety. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Gouda cheese. So Gouda cheese was introduced in Chile in the 1950s by European manufacturers. These European manufacturers were bringing new cheese equipment into Chile, and then they brought ideas to Chilean cheesemakers of how to make cheeses, all right? But how to make cheeses under the Chilean reality, using traditional equipment for Chanco cheese manufacture, all right? This story is pretty similar to what happened here in the United States with the manufacture of block Gouda, as we used to make them here, in which in the United States, the block Gouda manufacture is made using cheddar cheese equipment. All right, so basically it's the same kind of story. We accommodated our equipment to make a Gouda style cheese, all right, but instead we call it Gouda instead of Gouda. All right, so with this misspelling. And as you can see that these commercial plants, it mentions Gouda cheese as queso Gouda, as is made in Chile. All right, Gouda cheese is the most popular cheese manufactured in Chile. All right, it's mostly manufactured at industry scale. There are no small cheese manufacturers that make these cheeses, unless if there are small manufacturers that are making Gouda, they're making it the traditional Dutch way, all right? So that's something important to highlight. But basically, 45% of the cheese produced in Chile, of all the cheeses produced in Chile, are Gouda, all right? So how Gouda cheese is made? It's typically pretty similar of how it's made the Chanco cheese, all right? It's made, since these are cheeses made by large companies, large manufacturers, are made with pasteurized milk, all right? And these cheeses are made with mesophilic cultures, in which the mesophilic cultures are also including citric positive for butter flavor development and gas formation, all right? Again, similarly to Chanco, there is a partial whey drainage and whey dilution, right? But the whey dilution is different. We just use warm water. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a mistake here. So we use the whey dilution with warm water. It's not at 160. It's just warm water that is typically at roughly 90 degrees, and then we start the cooking step until we reach 104 degrees. All right. This cheese, in contrast, is with Chanco is completely brine salted. All right. But the hoops that we use for Gouda cheese is in blocks. All right. This cheese is ripened from 2 weeks until 1 month at varying temperatures, going from 50 to 60 degrees C. all right? So in a short period of time, they tend to develop these very nice characteristic buttery notes, all right? During the manufacture of Gouda cheese, unlike in the United States, the use of sodium nitrate is allowed, all right, at very low concentrations, less than 50 particles per million. The use of sodium nitrate will help us to prevent the undesirable gas formation issues, right? And again, based on standards of identity for Gouda cheese, this is the typical composition that should be the, in terms of range, right? In terms of moisture content, Gouda cheese is similar to Chanco, but in terms of fat in dry matter, Chanco cheese tends to have much more fat content than Chanco, all right? And typical pH values as typically observing in any ripened cheese with mesophilic starter cultures. All right. When we talk about the sensory properties of Gouda cheese, excuse me, again, these cheeses are typically made in blocks of different sizes. All right. And when we're talking sizes, they go anywhere from 4 to 30 pounds, 2 kilograms to 15 kilograms roughly, the cheese blocks. All right. Unlike the Chanco cheese, these cheeses have no rind, all right? Instead, these cheeses are vacuum sealed, all right? They develop a characteristic yellow color. It's not as intense as the block Gouda cheese made in the United States because we don't use annatto for color, all right? This cheese, unlike the Chanco cheese, doesn't have mechanical openings, but they can develop small eyes due to the incorporation of citrate positive cultures that will ferment for flavor development, but also for small eye formation. That's typically found in a traditional Gouda cheese, all right? The body is a semi-firm and elastic, all right? This cheese is very good for slice production manufacturing. So usually this cheese is typically cut into slice. This is how it's typically made in form of slices for final consumers or food services, all right? The buttery notes are very characteristic in this cheese as in any Gouda style cheese properties. One of the good things about this type of Gouda cheeses is that they have very good melting properties, all right? It melts really good. In contrast to the Chanco cheese melts really good, but it becomes really soapy, all right? So Chanco, when it gets soapy, cannot be used for end user applications, whereas Gouda cheese is very good to make empanadas. So empanadas is a very traditional Chilean dish, which is basically a pastry that we have an open pastry, we put cheese, we close the pastry, and then we fry it out, and we get this product empanada. So here in this photo, we can see how this Gouda cheese is stretching out of this empanada, all right? So generally speaking, Gouda cheese has very good melting properties in contrast to Chanco cheese that becomes really soapy, all right? So that was everything that I had to mention about Gouda cheese. Gouda cheese, which is pretty similar to a traditional Gouda, all right? We also have the manufacture of queso fresco or quesillo, which is a different variety, all right? In Chile, there are no standard of identity for manufacture of queso fresco, all right? But unlike different Latin American countries, we make the fresh cheeses only with rennet as coagulant, with no addition of starter cultures, with no pre-acidification as occurs with in other countries, such as Mexico, for instance, or such as some countries in Central America, all right? Our version of queso fresco and quesillo, they tend to have typically very low salt content as well, all right? So unlike other countries, because our climate conditions are milder than those ones in tropical like areas when the manufacture of fresh cheeses involve the addition of high levels of salt to increase the shelf life of products, all right? And again, I would like to highlight the quesillo, all right? The quesillo is a variation of a fresh cheese that is made typically with a weaker gel, all right, and higher moisture content. Therefore, we end up getting a product that is the ones that is shown in this photo with a very soft and clean body and texture and appearance, whereas the traditional queso fresco that we make in Chile tends to be more curdy and grainier than a quesillo. And by modifications to the cheese manufacturing protocols, we can obtain a quesillo-like texture. It's a sort of gel that we obtain at the end of the day, all right? And again, one of the major issues that we deal with fresh cheeses is that they have a very short life. High moisture content, low salt content, and no acid development make them prone to spoilage due to microbial activity very quickly, right? Again, I would like to mention, now coming back to, so I just finished with queso fresco and quesillo, all the cheeses made out of goat milk, out of cow milk. So now I would like to introduce you the ones that are made from goat milk. So just again to remind you, in this presentation, this is a map of Chile, and we have one specific region that is located roughly 300 miles up north from Santiago, the capital city, the Coquimbo region. That's by excellence the dairy land for goats, right? So, and I would like to talk about a very traditional cheese that's called a Cordillera cheese. And Cordillera assembles to a sort of Alpine style cheese, but made in the Andes with goat milk instead, all right? It's a traditional cheese that's made from small goat dairy farmers, all right? So the small goat dairy farmers, they live under very rustic conditions, all right? So these small dairy farmers, during summertime, they take all of their goats to get food up to the mountains in the Andes, all right? So during summertime, typically, Chile is located in the southern hemispheres. Therefore, we have opposite seasons as in the United States, in the northern hemisphere. So in Chile now, we're approaching to summer, whereas here in the United States, we're approaching to wintertime. So during summertime in Chile, typically from December to March, these dairy farmers lead all of their goats to high altitude pastures in the middle of nowhere in the Andes, all right, for feeding, all right? There are fresh pastures that can be found, and the goats are getting their feed from there, all right? This practice is called veranada, all right? Verano in Spanish means summer, so it's an action of summer, if I can translate it accordingly. That's kind of the closest translation I can think of right now, all right? So goats are moved up high into the mountain in the Andes, all right, to get some feeding, all right? But then the farmers remain with their animals during all summer there. So they keep an eye on the animals, but they milk the animals, and then they start making cheeses. But again, these farmers are with their goats, and they live in very rustic cabins there. So in those very rustic cabins is where these farmers make the cheeses out of raw milk. These raw milk cheeses that they make are known as Cordillera cheeses, all right? These Cordillera cheeses are very characteristic because they have a specific flavor due to the pastures that these goats were feeding, all right? Natural pastures up in the mountains in the Andes region, right? So, and there are two options of Cordillera cheeses. aged Cordillera cheeses as well as aged Cordillera cheeses. You might be wondering right now, making raw milk cheeses under those conditions could be very risky and dangerous for human consumption of fresh cheeses. That's how they live, these farmers. That's how they trade their cheeses, and that's how they live. All right. But there are some other instances where some traders go up to the mountains to get these ripened cheeses. All right. Cordillera cheeses, and then they can sell them in local markets, but within the area, close to the area. They can still trade in and commercialize raw milk cheese, fresh cheeses, which is curious, but there's also there's also trading of Cordillera cheese. All right, so that's a kind of anecdotic type of cheese that is made up to the mountain in the Andes in Chile under, again, very rustic conditions, right? So, but besides that, that's the production of Cordillera cheese is a very traditional product. It's small at very small scale, so it cannot be found. It cannot be found that easily, and it's only commercialized locally, all right, near those places where those cheeses are made, all right. But in contrast, semi-hard and fresh cheeses are also made a lot in Chile from goat milk, right? In recent years, there's been an increase in the number of dairy farmers that started raising goats instead, and they want to make cheeses out of them, all right? And they use the same approaches of making chanco cheese as well as fresh cheese to obtain products, all right? However, in Chile, there are no standards of identity for any cheese made out of goat milk, all right? So we can just classify them as soft cheese, semi-hard cheese, or hard cheese, all right? But that's how we typically make cheeses, with the same making procedures as chanco cheese. And then you can see in these photos, this is a semi-hard cheese, which resembles a chanco cheese with the mechanical opening, all right? And then another chanco style cheese made out of goat milk with rind. And this is a fresh cheese made out of goat milk, right? But what are the sensory properties? I think everybody knows what are the sensory properties of goat cheeses, but for the purpose of this presentation, I will describe them a little bit, all right? Because of differences in the composition of on the chemical composition of goat milk versus cow milk, goat milk cheeses tend to have a brittle texture and wider appearance, all right, in comparison to cheeses made out of goat milk, because of differences in the protein composition, because the absence of beta-carotene as found in cow milk and so on, all right? And goat milk cheeses tend to develop very specific goaty notes due to the occurrence of short-chain fatty acids, such as caproic, caprylic, and capric acid, all right? And so that's everything that I have to present now regarding all the goat cheese production occurring in Chile. I just wanted to mention about these traditional cheeses and what cheese manufacturers are making out of goat milk as well, all right? But just for a final remark for this presentation, Chilean cheeses were originally made from old and traditional European recipes, okay? But due to different historical, social, and technological factors, there were some the Chileans modified the cheese making, the original cheese making conditions to obtain unique products, all right? And then traditional recipes are still present there that can allow us to produce very characteristic properties under very rustic conditions, all right? But there is a great variety of cheeses in Chile that we can take advantage of to explore them and taste them and consume them, all right? So I would like to thank Carmen for giving me the opportunity of presenting about Chilean cheeses, as well as my sponsors, the Center for Dairy Research, Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin. But I will also like to thank you all for your attendance. And if you have any questions, we can address them right after this presentation, or you can also reach me through this email. Through email. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you. That was amazing. Does anybody have any questions?
When you speak about the cheese production in Chile, are you lumping cultured dairy products in with that, like crema and those sort of things, or is that not part of your consideration when you talk about the volume of
Oh no,
cheese?
yeah. When we talk about the volume, we're considering all the cheeses that are all the cheeses basically. So I look up at all the studies. I consolidated all the statistics about cheese because the Chilean statistics can split them by variety, by type of cheeses, including fresh cheeses and so on. So I consolidated everything into fresh cheeses versus semi-hard or hard cheeses. So the statistics are those ones. But those ones, however, those statistics are showing that official data is showing statistics from medium to large manufacturers. So there is a proportion of small cheese and informal cheese manufacturer that hasn't been reported. Even though there's like there is an agricultural and livestock census that they try to achieve that, but in my opinion, I haven't seen good and consistent numbers regarding the small manufacturers. So that for this presentation, I just only showed the large numbers instead.
Gotcha. Okay, it's smaller than I had expected.
Oh yeah, Chile has a very small dairy industry, and again, something that we have seen in the last 10 years is that the milk production remains relatively constant. You know, so that's something to account for.
Thank you. That was awesome. Does anybody else have any other questions for Rodrigo? No? All right. I will just want to, let's see. Just want to thank everybody for coming today and especially thank Rodrigo for presenting. It was an amazing presentation on Chile. And yeah, thank everybody for coming. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. Goodbye.